There's your disclaimer. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Renee McInnes, who is, again, the South Shore Chamber Board Chair. She is also the CEO of NBNA and Hospice. And Renee, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Courtney. Welcome, everybody. So I just wanted to, for those of you who may know or not know, that the Chamber adopted a long-term strategy to promote a stronger South Shore with more opportunities for people while protecting the qualities that make our region unique, including our natural resources. So that's the South Shore 2030 plan. It's driven in part by the Chamber's South Shore Economic Development Corporation, which helped pay for the study. So on that note, I'd like to introduce Peter Tedeschi, who is the chair of the South Shore SSEDC, as we like to call it. So Peter, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Renee. Appreciate it. Welcome, everybody. Great to be here. The SSEDC is really focused on identifying and addressing the issues that are impediments to growth and economic opportunity on the South Shore. Vibrant and local regional economies, they don't happen by accident. I think we know that. Live and work in those towns. This is really, we view this as an iterative and evolutionary process focused on the future while certainly always respecting the proud past we have here in the South Shore. 3 years ago, the SSEDC took a deep look into housing as part of the essential economic growth and engine here in the South Shore. And in late 2019, the SSEDC focused on water and wastewater capacity as an important issue for our present and our future. I think we're seeing some of the effects of some of those issues now. So this is very timely indeed. We're excited by the work that has been done and produced by the Metropolitan Area Planning Council and by Weston and Sampson. To offer some background on the project, I'd like to introduce the Chamber's president, Peter Foreman.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Renee. The Chamber and the Economic Development Corporation launched the project because we believed that future growth in some areas of the South Shore would be limited by water resources and wastewater capacity. We wanted to look at the link between economic growth and water management, and we focused on this corridor that we're going to be reviewing today. It's a corridor along Route 3. We chose the corridor for several reasons. It's already developed in many areas, but it's in a geographic area, being along Route 3, that we think is ripe for higher redevelopment, and in some areas that will encourage more business growth and bring more jobs to the region. It's compact. It's actually a fairly small, tight area within the South Shore that touches parts of 5 towns. It doesn't encompass the entirety of any one town, but touches the corners of 5. That made it an interesting project to look at, to see how we share resources or think about resources in a regional area, because many of these towns already share common water resources, and in some cases, a little bit of wastewater resources. That made it interesting for us, that development opportunity, the compactness, the potential for new growth. The findings in this report raise some new concerns that we think may apply to other communities and areas that the MAPC did not specifically study in this report. Where we go from here, of course, is an open question, and we hope that this starts a serious conversation about how water resources are managed in the South Shore, smarter land use in the area, and of course, economic growth. They work together. They do not have to be conflicting goals. And that's the goal of the Chamber and the EDC, is how we make a stronger South Shore while building our economy. I want to thank MassDevelopment for the grant. They were the major funder of this. The Economic Development Corporation kicked in about a quarter of the cost for this, but this was a MassDevelopment site readiness grant. And I want to thank the Metropolitan Area Planning Council for the report and work they did along with Weston and Sampson. I've had a chance to review it. It's an excellent report. I'm really pleased with the issues it raised and what it might suggest for us going forward. I'm pleased now to introduce Amanda Gregoire, the Vice President of Real Estate Services at MassDevelopment. Amanda.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you to the Chamber for hosting this morning, and to all of you that are logged in, joining us. Good morning. The report we're going to share with you, as Peter noted, was funded partially by MassDevelopment Site Readiness Grant Program. Created as part of the 2016 economic development legislation, the Site Readiness Program aims to increase the Commonwealth's inventory of large, well-located, project-ready sites, to accelerate private sector investment in industrial and commercial projects, and to support the conversion of abandoned sites and obsolete facilities into clean, actively used tax-generating properties. In its first 5 years, the program has awarded about $13 million to 58 projects in nearly every region of the Commonwealth. We're currently entering our 6th year of the program and have become part of the Community One Stop for Growth, which is a single application portal and collaborative review process for community and economic development grant programs that make targeted investments based on a development continuum. Now, this study was funded through our FY20 funding round with an award to the Metropolitan Area Planning Council to conduct an assessment of water and wastewater supply and demand dynamics for a number of potential growth areas in the South Shore region. This study is a great example of the type of work the Site Readiness Program supports. It's also a great example of how it can encourage cross-sector partnerships between our agency, the Chamber, who really helped to initiate this conversation, Mapc, who provided planning and land use expertise, and Weston and Sampson, who are, of course, the water and wastewater technical experts here. We also worked with the property owners, the municipalities where the properties are located, and the private sector to round out our understanding of the issues at hand. So it was a great team effort here. As you'll hear today, solutions to address water and wastewater are crucial, both for quality of life and future growth opportunities. We really recognize that this issue does not exist in a vacuum. This is not only a challenge in the places you'll hear about today or on the South Shore, but it's one that affects many of our communities throughout the Commonwealth. I think this study can really serve as a blueprint for others on how to start thinking about these challenges and some of the solutions that might be at play. We're pleased to have been able to support this work through the Site Readiness Program, and we look forward to the continued conversation, inter-municipal cooperation, cross-sector partnerships, and the creative solutions that are sure to come out of this analysis. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Martin and Josh from Mapc to provide you an overview of the study.
Great. Thank you, Amanda, and thank you everyone for that excellent introduction. There's Josh Fiala. I'm a principal planner at Mapc, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, and the Land Use Department. So we're happy to be with you this morning. I'll introduce my colleague, Martin Pillsbury, and let him give you a little background on himself.
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Josh. My name is Martin Pillsbury, and I'm the Director of Environmental Planning at Mapc. And so I've been working with this study, advising on some of the water-related issues at the planning scale.
Thank you, Martin. We have two colleagues also who were part of this planning study and don't show up on the screen right now. One previous colleague, Betsy Cohen-Neptune, who was a part of this study but has since left MAPC. So we're sad to see her go, but she is probably a familiar name to many people on the call. And we also have Sasha Perotti with us this morning, who is joining as an interim South Shore Coalition coordinator to help coordinate that subregion. So that might be a name that becomes more familiar in the coming weeks and months. So let's get into the study a little bit more. We've heard from our study partners, mostly so far. You'll hear a little bit more from the final study partner, Weston and Sampson, after Martin and I give a brief discussion of what our work was. And then we also had some other core team members who are part of guiding this effort and important to sort of advising and keeping us on track. So that includes many of the faces and names that you've already seen, but also includes Gabe Crocker of Crocker Design Group and Thomas Berkeley of the Union Point Development Company, who are both South Shore Chamber members. So we're happy and thankful for their participation throughout this process as part of the core team here. So along with the core team, I'll just mention that this study was in partnership with the communities that Peter introduced, and we did meet along the way with municipal members of the planning and staff of those municipalities, which we'll introduce in a moment, the municipalities that we were a part of the study, and then also had several properties which were part of the study as well, and met with the property ownership and developers associated with those properties. As you've already heard, but it's good to see it in writing on a screen, these are the funders which generously provided the support for this effort. So you can see those there, and we're very thankful for that, to keep this work going and to keep water and wastewater exploration on the center of our screens. If you don't know about MAPC, we are the regional planning agency for the greater Boston metropolitan area, which includes the communities in the South Shore. We provide planning and technical assistance to 101 cities and towns, of which you see on the screen. The region is broken into 7 subregions, of which the South Shore Coalition is one. And we provide land use technical assistance, of which I'm a part, environmental planning technical assistance, which Martin is a part, and then we also have a variety of other disciplines, including transportation, public health, economic development, and others. So if you're in a position to request technical assistance or need help with any sort of subject matter, we're here to assist the communities and stakeholders in the region. One of the things which has been on our radar for a long time, and I'm sure on many of yours as well, is water and wastewater. Way back in 2008, we as an agency put together a list of the most wanted data sets, is what we called it. And on that list was a sort of better compilation of the wastewater data, which was available in our region. And you can see this map is not a perfect map. It might not be up to date for some municipalities, but it's close. And it basically represents the availability of wastewater in the region, in those 101 cities and towns. You can see many in the light blue color are served by the Massachusetts Water Resources Authority, MWRA, and that's with a fully sewered system, which also in many cases is providing water supply to those communities as well. Some communities are not associated with the MWRA system, and some have no centralized sewer system whatsoever. And you can see those in the various color codes on the map. So 2 of those communities show up in our study area. You can see them, if you can see my cursor, in the yellow tone here. And then you can see actually that yellow tone repeated across the region. So we have in our study area, we had Hanover and Rockland that were not sewered, or sorry, Hanover and Norwell, which were not sewered. And you can see that repeated in the northeast quadrant of the region, in the northwest and the southwest quadrants of the region as well. So this is not a circumstance which is unique to our study area. It's something that we're looking at region-wide and something that concerns many of the communities. As you know or could imagine, the availability of water and wastewater infrastructure has a major impact on the type of development that can occur on a property and the types of land use patterns that can occur as well. The type of dense, compact, and walkable development that our agency believes is the most sustainable model of growth is difficult to achieve without centralized water and wastewater systems. You may still be able to achieve a larger scale mixed-use development communities that are not served by a sewer system, but it usually is associated with a package treatment plant. And the scale of development which is required to support and fund a package treatment plant on an individual site is usually of a scale that a community would object to in terms of what they see as appropriate growth. So there's a level of development that can be supported by a water and wastewater system, which is more centralized and collaborative, which we think is a scale which is more sustainable and supportable by communities. So a little more detail and specifics about this study as we get into it. There were several goals for the work. First and foremost, the study explored water and wastewater infrastructure in the South Shore. It also provided analysis of the opportunities and constraints related to water supply and wastewater capacity. To do this, our work focused on a corridor along Route 3 and 53 that runs through the municipalities of Hanover, Hingham, Norwell, Rockland, and Weymouth, and an analysis within those communities that looked at 6 example properties in that corridor. And on those properties, we basically used them to project potential development yields so that hypothetical water needs and wastewater flows could be compared to the capacity available in each town. The analysis allowed the team to make observations about water and wastewater infrastructure and help define recommendations to focus on actions and partnerships that would help encourage investment in water and wastewater infrastructure and support a variety of future benefits. As we worked through this process, we met with staff from each of the municipalities and property owners and developers, as I mentioned. And a few times, we did meet with those property owners and speak with the specifics of the properties. But we do not suggest this study does not suggest and does not seek to determine a specific or certain level of development uses or on those particular properties, but it aims to identify the water and wastewater challenges at the sites as a tool to better understand the long-term needs of the region. So the example properties themselves are shown on the screen now. We went through a process looking at the previous documents of those local municipalities to really come up with a set of potential development opportunity sites. And so this was reviewing plans which already exist in those communities. They included master plans, open space and recreation plans, housing production plans, economic growth plans, or other available planning documents. Through this review, a total of 27 properties across the municipalities were identified, and you can see those with the dots on the map, the blue dots. So we looked at each of those properties in detail for the purposes of this study and tried to collect a variety of conditions and circumstances across the towns that were represented by these example properties. We settled on the 6 properties which were identified with the yellow circles around them, which do fall along that Route 3 corridor, which Peter was describing, and roughly also follow that slice, which is formed by Route 53 and Route 3. In the end, the 6 example properties were selected and included the Cardinal Cushing Rear property in Hanover, the Unicorn Development property, also in Hanover, the South Shore property in Hingham, the Wildcat Lane property in Norwell, the land behind Home Depot in Rockland, that's what we call it, the land behind Home Depot, and the Bristol Brothers property in Weymouth. Throughout this process, we've been grateful to the owners and developers associated with these properties for allowing us to use them both as examples and to take the time to discuss this process with them. On each of the example properties, we prepared hypothetical build-out scenarios to explore the development potential of those properties. We prepared a build-out under 2 circumstances, one under the current zoning on those properties and one that was unconstrained by the current zoning on those properties. The first step in examining the water and wastewater infrastructure constraints was to define how much capacity would be needed to serve these hypothetical build-out projections. The method we used for the build-out projections was a mathematical approach. So we did not do conceptual site layouts or fit studies that included any sort of design or laying out on a property. Instead, what we did was look at, in the circumstance for the current zoning scenarios, the characteristics of that zoning, and calculated based upon the size and developable amount of developable land on the property, based upon those zoning constraints, what could possibly occur. And then for looking beyond the zoning constraints, we took a look at other nearby recent developments to define a reasonable scale and mix of uses, and then also looked at the developable land from a planning analysis, looking at wetland features and other encumbrances on the properties, more from a GIS level analysis. Before I hand it off to our engineers to get into the details of water and wastewater, I did neglect a moment, so I'll hand it to my colleague, Martin, to just give us a little bit of an overview on the other ways that MAPC is supporting water resources and services in the region.
Thank you, Josh. So I just want to give you a brief context of MAPC's involvement with water, wastewater, water resources issues. We work at kind of two levels: technical assistance projects for individual towns or groups of towns, and then at a higher sort of policy level, which we're fortunate to be in a position to actually have formal relationships with a number of state and regional bodies that are important for this kind of infrastructure. The kinds of projects we've done in the past include water supply protection, working with communities to protect the sources of water, groundwater and aquifer protection. In fact, we did some years ago a project just like that for the South Shore Coalition. Non-point source pollution studies, which we also did work in the South Shore and other subregions. And more recently, assistance to a number of communities around meeting their MS4 stormwater permit, which is, many of you may know, a major new permit. Communities are challenged with meeting requirements for better regulating and managing stormwater for better water quality. At the policy level, perhaps the most relevant piece is that MAPC, I was fortunate to be named to the Legislative Commission for Water Infrastructure Finance a few years back, and then have been participating since that commission turned in its report and disbanded as a formal legislative commission, but an ongoing effort then was started by an organization called the Water Infrastructure Alliance, which has everything from the consulting firms working in this area, the contractors who work in this area, the municipalities, the MMA, the MWA. And this is the group that really is the primary focus on advocating for more funding and for, in some other cases, better regulations around both our wastewater and our water supply, and actually our stormwater as well. So we're working on all of those fronts to try to help better conditions for the communities in the area of water resources and infrastructure. Thanks.
Thank you, Martin. So now we're going to hand it off to Tara and Lori from Weston and Sampson to talk through that handoff and continuation of the process using these 6 example sites to really explore the water and wastewater circumstances, and then bring us all the way through to some more generalized conclusions on those 2 infrastructure systems.
Great, thank you, Josh. I'm Tara McManus with Weston and Sampson, team leader, focused on the drinking water program, and Lori Toscano's on the wastewater side, my counterpart at Weston and Sampson, and she'll follow up at the end of this observations and conclusions section to talk a little bit more about the wastewater. So for the water side of things, I just want to get a little bit of an understanding here for the 5 towns. We have the town of Hanover. They have 3 groundwater treatment plants. The town of Hingham is actually one of our regional collaboratives. They're with River Water System. They actually provide water to Hull and North Cohasset as well as Hingham. The town of Norwell has 2 groundwater treatment plants. Town of Rockland is actually also part of a inter-municipal organization, and they are also regional water supply for the towns of Abington and Rockland and a small portion of Pembroke. So that's water provided by the Abington and Rockland Joint Waterworks, and they have 2 surface water plants and also 1 groundwater plant. And then the town of Weymouth has 2 water treatment plants with groundwater and surface water, and they are in the Boston Harbor watershed. We basically calculated all this information from Water Management Act permits, source information, and the individual public water suppliers' annual statistical reports to basically come up with some water use trends for each of these communities. And then the next step was basically taking the actual municipal water concerns and kind of taking a look at, exactly what was happening with the build-out scenarios completed by MAPC and the amount of water that would probably or hypothetically be projected to be used for different types of scenarios. Josh, can you flip to the next slide, please? All right, so this infographic was designed to more or less show a partnership between alternatives, I should say, of how we can get from one point to another with these different build-out scenarios. Again, I want to just stress that they're hypothetical build-out scenarios. They work based on some conservative approaches for water usage, as well as also using some conservation benefits. So overall, and Lori will talk a little bit on the wastewater side of things, but we wanted to make sure we could kind of project this under one slide for water and wastewater demand for the different types of build-out scenarios, which are more or less case studies for what you might see with additional developers in the area for each of these communities. So as you start to go from left to right across the slide, at the upper tier here, we have kind of more of a private ownership. And then we kind of get into this middle blue coloring with the private to public ownership. And then on the far right, you get into the actual public ownership, typically with more of like a regional public water supplier. At the bottom of each of these increasing blocks, if you will, the blue blocks, we actually do call out the different scenarios for each of the different developments. But again, these are more of the hypothetical water build out demand analysis. So we really want to kind of focus on, what are the alternatives and focus areas that each of these different types of developments might need for each of these different communities, as well as what might happen if regional boundaries actually were crossed and the different communities actually started talking amongst each other and starting to talk about partnerships along with the developers to really try to think about what would really happen if we had a better scenario for water availability for the entire region of the area. So on the left, we start out with the minimal build out. This scenario was more or less typically talking about individual wells, typically less than 10,000 gallons per day. As far as these scenarios are concerned, all 5 of the communities can most likely fit small, very minimal build out, smaller developments. But for this scenario, we actually are really trying to consider that, we're really looking for much larger construction and possible build outs to benefit the area for development. So as far as the individual wells are concerned, very likely they could build their own individual wells, or they potentially could connect into the existing water system. The next block, if you will, the teal color blue, is more of a public water supplier, as far as a community or non-community. And the build out scenarios, we're really talking about, water demands that are greater than 10,000 gallons per day, but less than 100,000 gallons per day. And typically this would encompass, more than 15 water service connections and more than 25 customers being served. It's more or less a setup for, a partnership with a possibility that you could, construct a well source or a private developer that might be able to supply this new development for themselves. However, the thought process would be the best case scenario for a developer and for the water system, for the municipal water system, would be to connect to the existing water system. Each of the developments that we looked at did have water mains that were in close proximity to the developments, to the 6 properties. And the biggest concern would really be at that point, while there might be some available water in the actual capacity side of things for the water system, for their withdrawal permits, the concern really was that the infrastructure, the existing infrastructure, would be the limitation, potentially existing treatment plants, as well as potentially the water mains themselves that convey the water to these sites. Everything would really need to start to be looked at for connections larger than 10,000 gallons per day to make sure that the overall water system could provide the water to these potential new developments. So then we started taking a look at, these larger hypothetical water uses that would actually be even greater than 100,000 gallons per day. And at that point, it kind of told us that that's really the break point right there. It's very unlikely for a private developer to find a water source that's going to be greater than 100,000 gallons per day. At that scenario, the real thought would be you almost have to connect to an existing public water supply. And then from that point on, maybe start to build a partnership with the actual water municipalities and discuss options of, building out the system, potentially, supplementing funds to help increase the infrastructure as far as the pipelines go, but also possibly improvements to the treatment facilities themselves to help actually with the capacity concerns that some of them have. And then the farther to the right, as you get into more of a much larger water demand, we start to look at more of a regional collaborative. As I said before, the Abington-Rockland Joint Waterworks already provides water to both the towns of Rockland and to Abington, as well as their river water system. They actually provide water to Hingham, North Cohasset, and Hull. So there are already partnerships currently in existence on the municipal level across the town borders. And the next step would really be taking a look at what opportunities could there be for collaboration even further with the municipalities, as well as potentially with the Massachusetts Water Resources Association, which is currently located as far north as Quincy. And we did, in our study, actually did start to talk to the town of Weymouth, who is actually considering a potential 100% community supply of Enterbury water. And that's something that they've just started to look at in the last year, which really kind of opens up this whole area to a potential for further down the Route 3 corridor to providing either partial or full water service to some of these areas that we've had in our study. So One of the biggest key issues that a lot of the municipalities were concerned about was also the water quality and impacts to the regional existing customers. So right now, the regulatory demands, they're ever increasing, and that to the water systems currently is one of the big limitations and concerns that they have with existing customers as well as future build out. How do they continue to increase and improve their infrastructure if they have to deal with considerations such as PFAS that you might be familiar with existing contaminants and future contaminants, and how much money needs to be spent to kind of keep up with the existing aging infrastructures. Next level thoughts are, if there's a significant increase in demand for development in the region, that the MWA alternative might be a much better ecological and environmental and water quality benefit to the community. So this is kind of just an overall slide. There's a lot of information on this. We'll be more than happy to answer some questions at the end, but for now, I'm going to transition it over to Lori to talk a little bit more about the wastewater side of things.
Great, thanks so much, Tara. And it might seem like we're getting into the weeds here with a lot of these details, so we'll try to keep it a little high level, but there are some details that are important, to understand and to formulate the basis for the study that we did in the conclusions or the continuation for the study that likely will be necessary for future development in this region and other regions. But to look back, the wastewater management side of things in this region is a little bit more diversified than the existing systems for drinking water supply, less comprehensive, if you will. So the town of Hanover does not have any centralized wastewater management system. They have no centralized sewer. They do have several individual wastewater treatment facilities along the Route 53 corridor to support wastewater management for individual developments there, like the Hanover Mall and the Cardinal Cushing Center and things like that. So that's kind of what we will call, and you'll see I have a similar graphic for the wastewater management systems coming up for the different alternatives, but that's what we call more decentralized wastewater management. So that's what exists currently in Hanover, and those that don't have a decentralized system have an on-site septic system. Town of Hingham has a different type of wastewater management. So they have two separate centralized systems. One district goes to the MWRA and one district goes to the Ware River Sewer District and is treated at the Hull Wastewater Treatment Facility for discharge. And then there is also a component of Hingham that has individual septic systems. So not the whole community is not provided with centralized sewer, but there are two sewer districts. The town of Norwell is more like Hanover in that they don't have any centralized wastewater management, and mainly all the property in Norwell currently relies on on-site septic systems. The town of Rockland is the total opposite of that. So they have a community-wide sewer system, centralized sewer system that basically serves, I think it's 95% of the town is served by a centralized system that goes to a treatment facility that's located in Rockland and can discharge about 2.5 mgd. It's an older facility. It is currently under review as far as necessary upgrades in the coming future, but it is still a centralized system. And then the town of Weymouth is our regional community in this study. So they currently have all their wastewater transmitted to the MWRA for treatment that goes to Deer Island, and it's treated and discharged into the harbor. So they currently contribute probably the most of all the communities here because they have the largest, most extensive system as far as wastewater management and sewer goes. So the next slide we'll talk is the wastewater management alternative. So it looks very similar to the slide that Tara just presented on the water supply side, but this is, what are the alternatives for where that extra water goes if in the future more development is seen and we can alleviate the limitations that currently exist for wastewater management. And I want to back up a little bit here, go a little bit higher level. So the overall intention of these graphics is to communicate a lot of information at one time. So we'll go through some of it, but it's also to kind of level the playing field and give the communities and even developers tools to understand what is available and kind of start the conversation at a baseline level. So you have all this backup information and you can kind of relate what we're saying might be necessary in the future to what currently exists in the present, and give you a range of alternatives. So similarly, it's set up with the ownership kind of bar across the top, and it moves from left to right. So on the left side, we have under the minimum build out item is on-site septic systems. So that's what currently exists in many of the communities, Norwell, Hanover, part of Hingham, and it's the only option for wastewater treatment in those communities. As we move up the steps here, we get to the decentralized alternative. So that's more like what exists currently in Hanover. So if a community like Norwell, who only has on-site septic systems now, wanted to move to the next step, they would potentially be granting for future development decentralized individual wastewater treatment plants on specific properties to treat that secluded or that isolated wastewater. So it's not a comprehensive approach. It's just kind of a piecemeal approach to wastewater management. So, but we move up to the next level, and that's kind of the cluster build out scenario where it focuses more on what is happening in Rockland. So Rockland has a centralized treatment plant and most of their community is served. So that's, again, kind of on the community level, we see flows typically over 100,000 gallons a day. For the decentralized approach, we typically see flows between 10,000 and 100,000 gallons a day. So it's kind of just the next step, and it's more community focused. So it would be individual communities, and you can have like service areas in other communities, but not fully serviced adjacent communities type of thing. That type of development would move to the next block, which is our last block here on the right, the regional alternative, which currently is MWRA, but on the wastewater management side, not much capacity exists currently that's not allocated for wastewater treatment at Deer Island. So they have water to supply, but they don't have treatment capacity to provide, with the exception of member communities who have allocations. Could that change in the future? Absolutely, but at the current information is that there isn't sewer capacity to extend MWRA sewer. So we look more at the multi-community approach, which is when adjacent communities get together to build a treatment plant to serve 2 or more communities. And those can be partial areas of the community, or they can be districts, as what happens in Hingham. But that's kind of on the wastewater management side of things. That's how we look at like full public ownership and a multi-community / regional approach. So that would be for the long-term future. That would take a while to get into place. It'd take a lot of collaboration, but collaboration starts with education and communication. So that's what we're trying to kind of get to with these slides that we put together. So then that's kind of as much detail as I want to get into now, but we're happy to answer questions after. Now we're going to kind of go back out, zoom back out, and look at the overall considerations for water and wastewater. So the first bullet we have here is probably the most important, and that's the cost benefit. That drives everything that happens in life. Is there has to be a cost and a benefit. There has to be a cost, unfortunately, and there has to be a benefit. So as you move up for both the water and wastewater, as you move up the ascending blocks in those graphics we just shared, you'll see that there is more public benefit on the health side and on the environmental protection side as you move up the graphic. Does that mean that you're not providing public health and environmental protection with an on-site septic system? No. That if that is the only option for your town or for your property, then, it's going to provide enough public health and environmental protection. However, as you move up, the more you invest, the better it is for the public health, because it's regulated more when you have a treatment facility and a groundwater discharge or surface water discharge. And it does more to protect the environment because it treats things to a higher level. It treats our water resources to a higher level. Another consideration, and one we've been talking about, and I think that, the seed has either been planted or has started to grow through this process that we've undertaken, is the intermunicipal coordination. Get neighboring municipalities that have these similar limitations to talk to each other and to find solutions that allow them to collaborate and work together for the common good. There are also options for public and private partnerships. So if we have a bunch of development scenarios that we've produced here, or we've thought out in order to provide examples of what kind of magnitude of water and wastewater would be necessary. But there is always that opportunity for developers to partner with public entities to either build the infrastructure and then the public entities take it over, or some type of partnership that, again, is for the common good. And some of those partnerships can also alleviate some of the existing environmental conditions by potentially connecting in an area that has an environmental need for an alternative wastewater management with a development that's being built. So linking what's there and is as a need and what could be there in the future. And then private partnerships are difficult. They're less feasible than public-private partnerships lots of times because of the competition that exists. And on the water side of things, there really isn't an availability for private partnerships with water supply. However, on the wastewater side, it's an opportunity if adjacent or nearby developers could reach some agreement on wastewater management. One of them cites the treatment facility, one of them cites the groundwater discharge. They both don't take up as much land area on their development sites as would be necessary for both of them to have both. There could be some common benefit. So in the future, we look to grow that potential for private partnerships. And then last, but certainly not least, is regional collaboration. So, the seed has definitely grown through this study with that. And we've talked to MWRA, and they're, like Tara mentioned, they're talking to Weymouth. And one of the suggestions was that we have like a regional collaborative meeting with MWRA to find out, what is available and what is the feasibility of that versus individual towns investing in something that is in their community. Can they invest in something that is already there and still will provide an environmental benefit and would alleviate the limitations that currently exist? So with all that, I'm sorry, I probably talked too much, but I will turn it back over to Josh to talk a little bit more about the development.
Great, thank you, Lori. So we're going to zoom out even just a little bit more and generalize the infrastructure considerations back to land use considerations. And so there are, I think, important implications between these infrastructure systems and what we call smart growth, which is really a more sustainable and forward-looking approach to growth and management in our communities, which includes resource management and making sure that we are using the resources and capacity that is available as efficiently as possible to improve the quality of life and health of the environment. So there are several documents which point to this type of growth in the region. For example, Renee in the introduction mentioned the South Shore Chamber's South Shore 2030 Choosing Our Future plan, which does put forward a comprehensive vision for promoting growth and job creation through strong communities and focuses on diverse, interesting, and attractive places to live, work, and enjoy a high quality of life. And typically those are the types of places that people would consider walkable, compact, mixed use. And those exact features, walkability and sort of density and mixing of uses are features which are difficult to achieve with the more individualized infrastructure systems, which were on the left side of those charts that Tara and Lori shared with us. So these are important infrastructure features to sort of get right and to move into the next century so that our development patterns can follow suit. The next is, so I covered the second bullet as well, kind of in that. So I'll move on to I think what's a very important bullet, the third one, in that in many of our discussions, it's been highlighted that we've heard actually communities find certain benefits in infrastructure limitations because community members see infrastructure limitations as a way to control growth or to stop growth from happening or to sort of pause their communities and stop change. But the unfortunate news from that perspective is that change continues, whether we like it to or not, and that growth continues. And growth can either happen in a pattern which is more resource intensive and less sustainable, or it can happen in a way that's more sustainable and more careful with the resources we're given. And so we think that it's important to get out of the mindset of thinking of infrastructure as the growth management tool and actually shift that to, from a planner's perspective, the more appropriate place of zoning. So let zoning be the growth management tool and let the infrastructure sort of take care of the needs that the infrastructure needs to take care of. And in so doing, if you create more infrastructure capacity that could potentially support development, that's okay. It does not need to be maxed out. It can be, that growth can be controlled, and the capacity that may come along with infrastructure can be controlled through the proper alignment of zoning and regulations. So we would, as the regional planning agency, strongly advocate for all municipalities in the region to have a current and up-to-date community-wide master plan. And then that community-wide master plan would be directly aligned with the zoning regulations and help to guide the development in communities towards a vision that has been supported and articulated. So that, just as an example, so many of the communities in the study area and of the South Shore have commuter rail stops. And so you might not be able to unlock the full potential from a smart growth perspective, looking at ways to create walkable, denser areas along those transit stops, which offer an alternative to the automobile. And that potential might be undercut currently by some of the infrastructure that's serving those areas. So that's an example of bringing all of this into alignment so that the land use can actually truly reflect what we might think it should be as an more idealized vision. This also points to the need, as Lori was pointing out in her comments, to mutual and strategic investments. So there are a lot of heavy lifts, of course, that would occur, capital investments that no one really wants to take the full burden of, and looking for ways to leverage private development projects to potentially contribute to solving an infrastructure issue is one approach, and that would be through private-public partnerships. And the service of what might be needed to unlock growth on a particular property might be able to serve larger infrastructure needs in a community or environmentally sensitive area. And then lastly, we do have a few suggestions in the report that we think could potentially help advance these conversations, looking at ways that municipalities could add into development review processes or pre-development conversations, a more sort of a broader look at the infrastructure options that might be available on a private development, and putting the responsibility onto the development teams a little bit to explore those options and to come forward to the municipalities with some alternatives which might not be the conventional approaches to water or wastewater, but really thinking of more collaborative multi-property or collaborative multi-municipality approaches. And so we do have some next steps, which we'll end our presentation with, and it looks like we have some, we'll leave, even though we've all talked a lot, some conversation time for some Q&A. But the next steps from a municipal perspective, we saw a lot of need as we went through this process, really centered around increasing and continuing the communication that we have, I think, plugged into in this conversation. Not to say that didn't exist before, but that we became a part of with this project. And that's increasing communication at the municipal level. So between those municipal staff members who are responsible for thinking about the future of the community and those that are really worried and concerned about the day-to-day operations of the water and sewer systems, and getting those groups together to think collaboratively more about what the future systems might need and how to get there. And then also some communication with between the community leadership and the community stakeholders themselves and the community members, and thinking about how do we bring these conversations in a more public way to develop a better understanding around what water and wastewater infrastructure needs look like, and how those investments might need to shape how we're managing resources, both from a capital and funding perspective, but also from an infrastructure perspective. And then expanding, as we always are sort of broken record at the MAPC about, is inter-municipal collaboration and making sure that there's multi-municipal solutions that are occurring for these large infrastructure problems that would benefit from economies of scale. There are property owner actions. I think the property owners are in a strong position to be a part of these conversations and advanced communication and advocating for infrastructure investments that could have multiple benefits for the communities and potentially for individual properties. And then exploring partnerships through some of those, the thinking around the private-public partnerships that might occur and how to advance those. And then there are some items for the chamber itself and the chamber audience and stakeholders and members, and really to build on your strength as a convener, as evidenced in this session, and build the partners and coalitions and collaboration that's needed to advance these big conversations around heavy infrastructure. And then also position itself, as it always does, around government advocacy and drawing in, particularly important as funds such as the American Recovery Act, or the American Rescue Plan, excuse me, is disposing of funds currently at the state level and filtering on down to regions and communities. And then also, as the infrastructure bill is still being worked through at the federal level, there's potential large amounts of funding that could be directly supportive of these infrastructure investments. So that government advocacy is very important. And potential future studies, we saw just a glimpse into some of the things that might be valuable in this work, such as a comparative cost analysis that might look at the current or more conventional systems of water and wastewater infrastructure compared to more collaborative or centralized approaches, and looking at the investments and how they might compare between the two, and the costs and benefits, as Lori was pointing out, that might come along with other types of infrastructure approaches. There are environmental, recreational, or potential other approaches, water quality, environmental quality, benefits which come along with other approaches. And then lastly, just looking and continuing to examine the findings of this work, and as we're continuing to reflect as a team, what are the broader implications here, and how do we get the message out about what those implications may be? So thank you all for that. I don't know if we want to pass it back to Peter, or who's going to?
Yeah, thanks, Josh. We're going to pass it back to Peter Foreman here for just a couple closing comments, and then we will open it up to Q&A and comments in a moment. I just do ask that you please use the raise hand function or drop your question or comment in the chat, and we'll call on you individually to unmute yourselves. So Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Josh, and all of you who worked on that. It was an impressive piece of work, and the report gives us a lot to think about. Fair to say that even though we studied the 5 towns, your findings would apply to a much broader area and other communities on the South Shore, and even in other parts of the state, suburban communities, but similar issues in other towns that we did not look at in this study.
Yes, I think that is the case. So these are sort of, I will say age old. They're kind of infrastructure issues which are ever present and a concern in a number of communities, I think both on the South Shore, but then also if you reflect back to the map which we showed at the beginning, which showed all the region's sewer and wastewater infrastructure. So there are a lot, communities such as Lincoln, Weston, Carlisle, Boxborough, Norfolk, Rentham, Dover, Sherburne. So those are all communities which have no centralized wastewater infrastructure, for example. So this is a sort of a line of questioning and an issue which shows up in front of us quite frequently and from sort of all corners of the region.
And one of the takeaways, a couple of takeaways I had from the study is that we're going to be facing problems, or at least a challenge, just on current use, because current supplies have been degraded over time, and there are new environmental issues. So fair to say that just doing nothing doesn't freeze things in time, that we're actually moving backwards with existing practices and water quality by saturating large portions of the area with this, what I call a two-straw theory of every parcel of land has one straw to take out fresh water and another to put in wastewater, degrading systems overall quality in the area. Would that be fairly accurate, that we can't stand still, that we're actually going to be moving backwards in some ways with supply and quality of that?
Yes, Peter, I'll give that a shot. That's absolutely true. The baseline alternative, we always examine that in every planning at level effort that we do. What is the do nothing approach and what are the implications of the do nothing approach? And it will just be piecemeal investment to try to solve the immediate need without looking forward and being proactive to basically make better investments, make more efficient and effective investments for, if you look a little bit forward into the future. Regulations are always changing, and they're not getting easier. So the investments, it's on the wastewater side of things, especially it's a little bit easier to predict what is going to be coming in your next permit cycle, if you will. So, if you look forward to the end of that permit cycle, at least you'll have made an investment, and the investments are significant. The amount of money that we're talking about to upgrade a wastewater treatment facility, for example, or to increase treatment at your water supply is significant. So it's always better it will be more sustainable in the future if you think forward versus just trying to address the immediate need.
Okay. Courtney, I see in the chat that Jeff Rosen has asked a couple of questions. For those who don't know him, Jeff is actually a national water expert, actually has done international work with his firm on that. Jeff, do you want to ask you questions and give a little context to that?
Yeah, Jeff, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for recognizing me. I appreciate it. This is a great report. Work very, very well done. My compliments to the entire team. Some of the questions that I have regarding looking forward in a short term, as Lori just discussed, versus looking forward in a longer term. Technologies in the water treatment industry are changing dramatically. The community, I'm sure the folks at Weston and Sampson are looking at this and seeing it as well. Technologies are changing dramatically, and where we are right now is likely to change dramatically over the next 30 to 50 years. And that's probably the time frame that we're talking about for major infrastructure changes. While I like the idea of MWRA, they're a great organization. The pipes start getting stretched a long way, and the terminus of those pipes are likely going to have the greatest degradation and problems with maintenance. And I wonder whether you've looked at the regional possibilities of treatment on the South Shore, either with MWRA as a sponsor and holder, or separately as a separate authority? And also, have you guys looked at the emerging technologies like desal tied to alternative energies, solar and tidal, and to water reuse, which I just heard yesterday, the state of California is now looking to propose a direct potable reuse of wastewater. So that's coming. Once California does it, you'll see it emerge throughout the country. So my question is, what happens when you look at this from a 30 to 50 year horizon rather than a 10 to 20 year horizon?
Laura, you want me to go first?
Sure, you go first, Tara.
So, this study was actually more of a preliminary. So we certainly would be more than happy to offer some solutions. This is more of a understanding that obviously there is a need, and I think we started out this project with that understanding in general. But we wanted to really start the communication and opening it up between the developers and the municipalities, and just talking it through about next steps, and really getting to that partnership that we've been talking about. Certainly there is opportunities for desale. I think it's all about a cost benefit analysis, and that is not something that we did under this report. So we stuck to a much higher level view of things. Long-term solutions, that's something that would be a potential, as I think one of your other questions earlier was, are there any regional collaborations that you consider non-MWRA related? And certainly there is that opportunity. Right now, obviously on the water side, as we spoke about, each of the 5 communities have their own full water systems, and they are providing water to the customers in those regions, and pipeline networks are available to connect to. So there's that level of, we started to talk about the opportunity to possibly create smaller regional little areas, if you would. But that, again, we started to get into the solutions, and that wasn't necessarily part of this study. And you go down a pretty long rabbit hole, but that would likely be the next phase, if you will.
Thanks, Tara.
Yeah.
Anything to add?
I was just going to follow up on the wastewater side of things related to your question, Jeff. Would a regional multi-community type wastewater treatment facility with groundwater discharge be feasible in this area? Yes, absolutely. But citing that and, finding the appropriate place for it, we are not likely to get a surface water discharge. It's just not something that EPA gives out very easily. But a groundwater discharge, and that would lead to reuse of the effluent and recharge of the aquifers and things like that. So like Tara talked about, it's all part of the solution, and that's kind of getting into the preliminary design, but definitely benefits of that option of going to the multi-community approach for wastewater management would be environmental benefit. And, we would look at all the alternatives that were available, when we were doing that kind of cost benefit, the true cost, calculation of the cost type of planning.
Great, thank you. Like I say, great job, and my compliments to everybody involved in implementing this. Great study, great report.
Thank you.
Could I just add something, Martin Pillsbury here? You mentioned, Jeffrey, water reuse. And at MAPC, actually, this is an option that we really think has more potential. Has barely been tapped in this region. You're seeing a lot of it in the West, where they're under more duress and have been for a longer period of time. But you shouldn't have to be under duress to do good, sustainable, and cost-effective measures. There are a few examples of water reuse for non-potable use already in our region on a few larger scale developments, including none other than Gillette Stadium and the premium outlet Rentham Mall. And the Intel facility in Hudson. We did a case study and to try to help understand and promote this concept, which is a publication that I could actually share with the chamber and others as a side piece. We titled it "Once is Not Enough." We shouldn't just be using the water once. So I just wanted to add that that's an important piece for the potential tool in the toolkit here.
Thank you, Martin. Appreciate that. If you want to send that to me, I'll send that out to everyone too. Samantha Woods, are you able to unmute yourself and ask your question? It's a great question.
Sure. Hi, Courtney and others. Really excited to hear the findings. And and really think about the potential for collaboration. Sort of been a long time discussed issue, and I think one that as a watershed association, we obviously see the need for. And so my question, I think, has almost started to be answered a little bit in some of the previous discussions about, obviously the watershed associations are concerned about the existing impacts and that already occur as a result of water withdrawals, historic water withdrawals. And sort of how can we, if we're going to research new water supplies, bringing in water from MWRA, or thinking even more progressively perhaps about water reuse, how can we put the water back into nature that we've been taking out, and sort of stop having the impacts that we have on our river herring and other species that make living here so unique and beautiful, and that we want to continue to protect. So, I just want to put a word in for the watershed associations to be part of those partnership discussions. I personally sit on the Water Resources Commission, so I will have a vote if there's ever going to be any movement of water across the basin. I'd love to be able to be part of the discussion before, at the beginning, so that we can make sure that all the stakeholders get a voice in that.
So that is another level that certainly is impacted, and I think Weymouth is a good example of what their discussion is with the MWRA currently. If it goes 100%, and this is something that we've just recently talked with them in the last couple of weeks, that the herring would come back, they would not be withdrawing anymore from their watershed, importing water from, say, MWRA, that would have an immense environmental impact, benefit in that community. For an opportunity like that. So, of course, that is one of the biggest things that, searching for more water, that's why one of the things that we put into our infographic on the water side, it is highly unlikely that, number one, you're not going to be, find a surface water supply that's going to be permitted. Groundwater, possibly on the smaller, less than 10,000 gallons a day, individual wells for communities might be an opportunity, but for the benefits of everybody involved, we highly recommend connecting to an existing water system out of anything and not creating a new water source. Just on if it's a developer, just even trying to permit and treat that water for potability for the development consumption would be very difficult and costly as it is anyway. So I think that is certainly the watersheds would be another member that would. Once we get to the next steps, obviously, when we start looking at the cost benefits, the benefits significantly for the region, making sure certainly any development would not be impacting in a negative sense.
Thanks, Tara.
Thanks.
All right, last call. Anyone have any questions? Otherwise, I'm going to turn the floor back over to Peter Foreman to wrap it up for us today. Peter, you're on mute.
Thanks, Courtney. I'd reiterate to everyone, one reason we did not get into solutions is we didn't think the property owners or towns would be ready for the discussion. We first had to identify what the problem was, and the towns the 5 towns, all agreed at one level to be part of a discovery with providing information on current status, but none of the towns have even been asked or have endorsed the suggestions or recommendations that are put out in this report. So the question does come, where do we go from here? Because the 2030 plan and the Chamber's work never intended to be just delivering white papers and finding information, but how do we act on that and find solutions? So our Economic Development Corporation Board meets next month, and the conversation will be around what do we do with this report? How do we move it to the next steps? How do we engage some or all of these 5 towns, and maybe even some additional communities who may be facing these problems? And how do we start exploring the possible solutions. We do think there's some urgency, not urgency of next month or next summer's water bans, but we think there is some urgency coming up because some communities may be looking on their own to bring MWRA down. That may be an opportunity for broader participation, and you don't want to close out that opportunity. We think with the federal infrastructure money coming, this is a ideal time for some South Shore communities to be thinking about projects that could get funded with the federal infrastructure bill that is due to pass sometime in the next few weeks, we hope. And then it's timely because of the new environmental concerns that are being identified in some of our communities. So the report, we think, is timely, far more timely than when we launched this. We launched it with a one set of expectations. It turns out to be a particularly good time to do this, and we'll carry the conversation forward. Samantha, thank you for volunteering to be part of the discussion. You didn't need to, because we were going to be calling you anyway as we started looking at how do we discuss this, but I'm glad you have at least this morning agreed to be part of that. We'll take it from there. Looking forward to working on this with interested parties. Feel free to reach out to us if you want to stay informed. Go to our website. The full report of about 120 pages is now on our website, and we'll be posting the recording of this later today or tomorrow. Again, thank you very much to MassDevelopment for making the bulk of the funding possible, to MAPC for really an excellent, thorough job combining this with other initiatives and interests we have around land use generally and economic development, and to Weston and Sampson for all of the technical help. Thank you, Renee and Peter Tedeschi. And with that, stay tuned, and we'll be continuing the conversation.
Thank you.